I had 90 seconds before Ha-joon's wine glass touched his lips, and Victor walked away a king. My fingers trembled as I adjusted the water pitcher on my tray, the crystal rattling just enough to betray me. The folded napkin in my apron pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds, like evidence, like a death sentence. Around me, the azure room hummed with the particular frequency of old money and older secrets. Murmured Korean mixed with Russian, the clink of platinum cufflinks against marble tabletops, the whisper of imported wool against butter-soft leather. Outside, Lake Michigan churned dark and restless against the 40th floor windows. But in here, everything gleamed, everything controlled, everything suffocating. I crossed the room toward the corner booth like I was walking into a furnace. Ha-joon sat with his back to the city, Seoul's skyline visible through the window behind him, like he'd brought his kingdom with him to Chicago. He looked carved from something harder than marble. Severe cheekbones, black hair swept back with product that probably cost more than my mother's funeral. A charcoal Brioni suit that whispered power in every thread. His hands rested on the table, one finger tapping a slow, methodical rhythm against the white linen. Patient, controlled, a man who'd never been caught off guard in his life. Beside him, Victor Kovac leaned in close, speaking in low tones that made Ha-joon's expressions soften into something almost resembling trust. Victor's brown hair caught the recessed lighting, his navy suit perfectly pressed, his smile gentle and concerned. He looked like a loyal advisor, like family, like someone who would die before betraying his boss. He wasn't. 17 minutes ago, I'd watched him poison the wine. The private kitchen at Azure wasn't really a kitchen. It was a staging area in the back corridor, all stainless steel and glass, where the executive chef prepared dishes for VIP tables personally. I had been sent back to retrieve the special dessert service for table 12, weaving past prep stations and sous chefs when I heard voices. Male, quiet, speaking what sounded like Serbian or Croatian. I froze beside the walk-in refrigerator, my hand still on the door handle. Through the gap between the steel shelving and the wall, I saw him, Victor, standing at the wine service station where the sommelier had left Ha-joon's bottle breathing. A 2009 Chateau Margaux, $6,000, decanted 20 minutes ago and waiting for the second course. Victor's back was to me. His hand moved with surgical precision. A vial no bigger than my thumb. 3 drops into the wine, swirled once, twice. The liquid caught the light, looking exactly as it had before. Nothing changed. But everything changed. He spoke into his phone in that consonant, heavy language, his voice carrying the particular cadence of a man checking off items on a list. I caught fragments that meant nothing. Gotovo, 20 minuta. Bolnica espremna. The tone was unmistakable. This wasn't panic. This was procedure. A plan executed with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed it 100 times. My breath stopped. The refrigerator's hum sounded deafening. Victor pocketed the vial and turned toward the corridor. I pressed myself against the wall, praying the shadows and the hanging copper pots would hide me. Through the gap, I watched him pass, 6 feet away, straightening his tie. His face was calm, peaceful even. The expression of a man about to inherit an empire. He disappeared toward the dining room, his cologne lingering. Something expensive and clean that now smelled like a grave. I stood there counting my heartbeats. 10, 15, 20, waiting for my legs to remember they could move. When I finally pushed through the doors back to the main floor, dessert service forgotten, my mind was sprinting through what I'd seen. The wine. Ha-joon's table. 20 minutes until service. I stepped into the azure room and everything snapped into terrible focus. Victor had returned to Ha-joon's side, pouring water, adjusting Ha-joon's napkin with the attentiveness of a devoted servant, playing the role so perfectly it made my stomach turn. Ha-joon laughed at something Victor said, his hand clapping Victor's shoulder with genuine affection. He had no idea the man pouring his wine had already written his eulogy. I scanned the room with new eyes, my serving tray pressed against my ribs like armor. The other diners, the staff, the exits. Who else was part of this? The sommelier approaching with Ha-joon's bottle looked normal, professional, unaware, but three men sat at separate tables, all alone, all watching Victor with the focused attention of people waiting for a signal. They weren't eating. They were positioned. Guards, maybe, or witnesses, or cleanup. My pulse hammered so hard I thought I'd pass out right there on the marble floor. I could walk away, clock out, say I felt sick, call in tomorrow and pretend I see nothing. Men like Ha-joon didn't sit at tables like this by accident. He'd built his throne on bones. Maybe Victor was just settling accounts. Maybe this was justice wearing a different face. But then I thought about my grandmother's voice reading scripture in that South Side apartment where the heat never worked. What you permit, you promote. What you ignore, you endorse. I thought about the community center she'd spent 40 years building, now buried under debt and city liens because men in expensive suits decided that neighborhood wasn't worth saving. I thought about how I needed $300,000 by the end of the month or everything she built would be auctioned off to developers who'd turn it into condos. I thought about mercy unearned and debts unpaid and the way power only respects power. I thought, if I let him die, I'm just another witness who knew and did nothing. So I grabbed a napkin from my station, pulled the pen from my apron, and wrote 9 words that would either buy me a fortune or a bullet. The chandelier above cast fractured light across my hands as I moved toward Ha-joon's table. Each step felt like walking through concrete. Time stretched and contracted, elastic and strange. I was aware of everything. The scratch of my uniform collar against my neck, the weight of eyes I couldn't identify, the way Victor's smile looked like a mask stretched too tight over something cold and calculating beneath. Your wine, Mr. Kong? My voice came out steady, professional, like I hadn't just watched his most trusted advisor poison his drink, like my hands weren't shaking. Like the napkin in my pocket wasn't burning a hole through my skin. The sommelier set the decanter down on white linen, crystal catching the light like a threat. I didn't pass the napkin. My hand froze halfway to the table, survival instinct overriding stupidity at the last possible second, because Victor was watching me. Not obviously, not directly, but I felt his attention like a blade pressed against my throat, the way a rabbit feels the shadow of a hawk. So I set down the water glasses, murmured something about the evening special, and retreated. My legs carried me back through the Azor room on autopilot, while my brain screamed at me that I just made the worst mistake of my life. I'd seen too much, known too much. And now I'd hesitated, which meant Victor would wonder why. Ha-joon raised the wine glass to his lips. I reached the service station and gripped the marble counter so hard my knuckles went white. I couldn't watch. Couldn't not watch. The room tilted sideways, sound compressing into a single high-pitched whine that drowned out everything except my own heartbeat. Then Ha-joon's glass hit the table, not gently. It shattered, Margot bleeding across white linen like an exit wound. Ha-joon lurched forward, one hand clutching his chest, the other scrabbling at his collar. His mouth opened, but nothing came out except a sound like tearing metal. His eyes went wide, not with fear, but with incomprehension, the look of a king who'd never considered mortality might apply to him. He collapsed, just folded in on himself, gravity taking him down in a way that looked almost gentle, almost peaceful. His head hit the table and then slid sideways, coming to rest against the ruined tablecloth. For one perfect second, the Azor room held its breath. 50 people frozen in a tableau of horror and disbelief. Then the chaos erupted. Victor moved first. Of course he did. He was on his feet before Ha-joon hit the table, phone already in his hand, voice cutting through the panic with surgical authority. Orders in Korean, sharp and efficient. Two bodyguards materialized from nowhere, surrounding the booth. A third was already clearing a path to the private elevator. Victor's hand went to Ha-joon's neck, checking for a pulse, his face a perfect mask of devastated concern. I watched him through the crowd and saw the performance for what it was. The slight delay before he called for the ambulance, the way he positioned himself between Ha-joon and the other diners, controlling the sightlines. The careful, deliberate touch as he loosened Ha-joon's collar, doing exactly what a loyal consigliere should do, while ensuring no one else got close enough to examine the boss too carefully. This was a man who'd planned for every contingency, who had choreographed this moment down to the second. The police arrived in 8 minutes, paramedics in 10. By then, Victor had the entire scene locked down. He spoke to the officers in perfect English, his accent barely noticeable, explaining that Mr. Kong had a heart condition, that this had happened before, that his personal physician was already en route to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He handed over business cards, made phone calls, his voice never rising above that same calm, authoritative tone. He was so convincing, I almost believed in myself. The restaurant emptied in 20 minutes. Police took statements from the sommelier, the chef, and 2 waiters who'd been nearby. Victor stood at the center of it all, directing traffic, managing the narrative, making sure everyone saw exactly what he wanted them to see. No one asked me anything. No one even looked at me. I was just another black server in a room full of power, invisible by design and necessity. But Victor looked at me once. Just once. As the paramedics loaded Ha-joon onto the gurney, as the police finished their preliminary sweep, as the last stunned diners filed toward the elevators, his eyes found mine across the emptying room. He smiled. Gentle. Almost apologetic. The smile of a man who just remembered he'd left one piece of business unfinished. Then he turned back to the detective, and I understood with perfect, crystalline clarity that I was already dead. I just didn't know when the execution would be scheduled. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from the hospital billing department. Final notice. Payment due in 72 hours, or they discharge my grandmother to hospice care. $300,000. Unappealable. Impossible. I deleted the message and watched Victor shake hands with the police captain. I'd wanted the money to save her community center, the place she'd built brick by brick over 40 years, now drowning in liens and predatory city loans. I'd needed a miracle. Instead, I'd witnessed a murder, and the killer knew I knew. The smart move was to disappear. Quit. Change my name, get on a Greyhound to anywhere that wasn't Chicago, and pray Victor had bigger problems than one waitress who might have seen something she shouldn't have. But smart required money I didn't have and time that had just run out. So instead, I showed up for my next shift at Azor with my uniform pressed and my survival instinct sharpened to a razor edge. If Victor was going to kill me, I needed to know when. And if I was going to die anyway, I might as well understand what I died for. The restaurant operated on a skeleton crew for the next 3 days, while management dealt with the aftermath, which meant I pulled double duty, restocking linens, deep cleaning the private dining areas, tasks that took me into places the guests never saw. The back corridors, the service elevators, the storage rooms where the real business of running an empire happened in the margins between courses. I became a ghost. The kind of invisible that comes naturally when you're black and female and wearing an apron in a building designed for people who never make their own coffee. I pushed my cart through hallways, restocked wine cellars, and emptied trash bins in executive lounges. But I listened. Victor had set up a temporary command center in the executive dining room on the 42nd floor, 2 levels above Azur. I discovered this while restocking the private bar, watching through the service window as he held court. 4 men in expensive suits, all Korean, all speaking in tones that ranged from deferential to desperate. Victor sat at the head of the table like he'd been born there, his silver hair catching the afternoon light, his voice carrying that same controlled authority I'd heard the night Ha-joon collapsed. I couldn't understand the Korean, but I recognized the rhythm. Reassurance. Promises. The careful redistribution of power, wrapped in the language of continuity and stability. One of the men placed a folder on the table. Victor opened it, nodded, made a single phone call in English. Instructions to a bank in the Caymans, transfer authorizations, account numbers that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant everything to the men watching him work. When they left, Victor made 3 more calls. I was in the adjoining storage room, counting napkins I'd already counted twice, my ear pressed to the wall like my life depended on it, because it did. The first call was to someone named Alexei, Serbian or Russian, the words coming fast and efficient. I caught maybe 1 word in 10, but the tone was unmistakable. Logistics, timelines, something about Singapore and 72 hours. The second call switched to English. A lawyer, judging by Victor's sudden formality. Discussions about trust structures, estate planning, and medical power of attorney. All of it perfectly legal, all of it designed to move Ha-joon's empire from one set of hands to another while the boss lay unconscious at Northwestern Memorial. The third call was the one that made my blood stop. Victor spoke in Korean, his voice dropping to something almost tender. Then he switched to English, just 3 sentences. Clear enough that even through the wall, I heard every word. The waitress from that night, Kiana Wright. Find out everything about her. Family, debts, weaknesses. I want a full profile by morning. The line went dead. I stood in that storage room, surrounded by starched linens and my heart hammering so loud, I was certain he could hear it through the wall. He hadn't forgotten. He'd just been patient. And now I wasn't just a loose end. I was a target being measured for elimination. I left the storage room on legs that barely held me, my cart rattling too loud in the empty corridor. But my hands were steady as I pulled out my phone and started making notes. Names, times, account numbers I'd glimpsed through the service window. Fragments of a picture I didn't fully understand, but knew I needed to complete. Because if Victor was coming for me, I needed leverage. And the only currency that mattered in his world was information he couldn't afford to have exposed. The answer came 2 days later, delivered by accident, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was wiping down tables in the executive lounge when 2 of Victor's men walked past speaking Korean, in voices they assumed were private. One phrase cut through the rest, repeated twice with increasing urgency. I didn't understand the words, but I recognized the cadence of a countdown. Then one of them switched to English, frustrated. If we don't get into the penthouse before the legal team seals it tomorrow, we lose access to everything. The other responded in Korean, but his tone carried the weight of a death sentence. They disappeared into the elevator, leaving me standing there with a wet cloth and a sudden, dangerous realization. Ha-joon's penthouse. Whatever Victor needed to complete his takeover, whatever evidence might prove the poisoning, it was there. And he was running out of time to retrieve it, which meant I was too. The Azure-occupied floors 38 through 43, Ha-joon's private residence, took up the entire 45th floor, accessed only by a separate express elevator that required biometric clearance. I'd never been up there. No service staff had, except for Ha-joon's personal housekeeping team, all Korean nationals who reported directly to him. But buildings had bones beneath their luxury, infrastructure. Service corridors that connected every floor, whether the residents wanted them to or not. I found Marcus in the loading dock, the maintenance supervisor who'd worked the building for 20 years and knew every pipe, every shaft, every forgotten passage in its steel skeleton. I had brought him coffee every morning for 2 years, learned his daughter's name, and asked about his bad knee, investments I had made without knowing I'd need to call them in. The penthouse level, I said, setting down a cup the way he liked it. 2 sugars, no cream. Is there a maintenance access? Marcus looked at me over his reading glasses, the kind of look that said he knew better than to ask why. Environmental systems. Northwest corner, floor 44. Leads to the mechanical room that services 45. But you need clearance. I pulled out the master service card I'd lifted from the manager's office 3 months ago, back when I was planning to steal wine inventory to sell for quick cash. Different crisis, same desperation. Will this work? He studied the card, then studied me. Something passed across his face, some calculation I couldn't read. Then he reached into his toolbox and handed me a second card, this one grimy with use. This one's better. Gets you past the mechanical locks. But Kiana, whatever you're doing up there, you've got maybe 2 hours before night security makes rounds. I took the card. I was never here. Never saw you. The access corridor was exactly as promised. A narrow concrete passage that smelled like machine oil and recycled air, hidden behind an unmarked door that opened with Marcus's card. I climbed the utility stairs to 44, my shoes silent on metal grating, and found the mechanical room. Industrial HVAC units, electrical panels, and a single bore marked Private Residence Access, authorized personnel only. The card reader blinked green. The lock disengaged with a whisper. I stepped through into Ha-joon's world. The penthouse was dark, with only the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows providing illumination. Minimalist furniture, all clean lines and expensive restraint. Korean art on the walls, each piece probably worth more than I'd make in a decade. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and something medicinal, like the space itself was holding its breath. I had 2 hours to find whatever Victor was willing to kill for. And somewhere in the building below, his men were planning their own break-in, racing against the same clock, hunting the same prize. I pulled on the latex gloves I'd stolen from the kitchen and started searching. The office was the obvious place. A glass desk with nothing on it except a laptop docking station, and a single-frame photograph of Ha-joon shaking hands with someone who looked like Korean royalty. I tried the drawers. Locked. Professional grade. The kind that would take tools I didn't have and time I couldn't spare. I moved to the bedroom. Immaculate. The bed made with military precision. Closet organized like a showroom. Nothing personal. Nothing revealing. This was a man who lived in his head, not his space. The bathroom yielded prescription bottles, all legitimate, all labeled, heart medication, blood pressure, nothing that screamed poison or conspiracy. 40 minutes gone. My hands were starting to shake. I stood in the center of the living room, forcing myself to think like Ha-joon, a man who'd survived decades in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was inflation. Where would he keep the thing that mattered most? Not hidden, that implied fear, but not obvious, that implied carelessness. My eyes caught on the bookshelves. Real books, not decorator props. Korean literature, philosophy, and histories of the Joseon dynasty. And there, on the third shelf, was a leather-bound ledger that looked decades old, the spine cracked with use. I pulled it down and it fell open naturally to a page marked with a red ribbon. The entries were in Korean, columns of numbers and dates that meant nothing to me. But clipped to the marked page was a photograph, slightly faded. Ha-joon, maybe 20 years younger, standing beside Victor, both of them smiling, brothers in all but blood. Beneath the photo, a USB drive on a lanyard. My fingers closed around it as I heard the elevator chime in the hallway. Victor's voice carried through the penthouse door, speaking rapid Korean. 2 other voices responded. They were here, right outside. I had maybe 10 seconds before that door opened. I shoved the USB into my bra, replaced the ledger on the shelf, and ran for the mechanical access store. My hip caught the corner of a side table, sending a decorative bowl clattering to the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. The voices in the hallway stopped. A key scraped in the lock. I made it through the access door as the penthouse entrance swung open. I pressed myself against the concrete wall of the mechanical room, heart hammering. watching through the crack as Victor entered with two men. He stopped, turned, looked directly at the bookshelf where I had been standing 30 seconds ago. He walked to it slowly, like a predator following a scent. His hand reached for the ledger, pulled it down, and opened it to the marked page. The photograph was still there. The USB was not. Victor's face remained perfectly calm as he closed the ledger and replaced it on the shelf. But his hand clenched once, knuckles going white, before he smoothed his expression back into that same practiced neutrality. He said something in Korean, soft and precise. One of the men responded, gesturing to the mechanical access store. They were discussing entry points. Discussing me. Victor pulled out his phone and made a call. When he spoke, it was in English, clear and measured. Seal all exits from the building. No one leaves until we find what was taken, especially not the staff. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran down the utility stairs, the USB drive burning against my skin like evidence, like ammunition, like the single piece of leverage that might keep me alive long enough to understand what I'd stolen. Behind me, I heard the mechanical door open and Victor's footsteps echoed down the stairwell. Calm, measured, inevitable. He wasn't chasing me. He was hurting me. And I'd just run exactly where he wanted me to go. I made it to the loading dock before they boxed me in. Two of Victor's men materialized from the service corridor, cutting off the exit to the street. A third stood by the garage door, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who'd done this before. I pivoted toward the kitchen entrance and found Victor himself blocking the path, his silver hair immaculate, his hands in his pockets, like we were meeting for coffee. "Ms. Wright." His voice carried that same gentle authority, the tone of a teacher correcting a promising student. "I think we should talk." I pressed my back against the concrete wall, calculating distances I couldn't cross and exits that didn't exist. The USB drive felt like a bomb against my skin. "I don't have anything to say to you." "No." He took a step closer, unhurried. "Then perhaps you'll listen. You took something from Mr. Kang's residence, something that doesn't belong to you. I'd like it back." "I don't know what you're talking about." Victor smiled, not unkindly. "Kiana, may I call you Kiana? I know about your grandmother's community center. South Shore, isn't it? $300,000 in liens and predatory loans. Payment due in 72 hours or the city auctions it to developers." He paused, letting that sink in. "I also know you witnessed something in the private kitchen 3 nights ago. Something that's made you very nervous, very desperate." My throat grew dry. "You poisoned him." "I saved the organization." His tone didn't change, still measured and reasonable. "Ha-joon was going to destroy everything we built. Soft, sentimental, making alliances with people who would have bled us dry. Sometimes loyalty means making difficult choices." "Loyalty?" The word came out sharp, bitter. "You tried to kill him." "I removed an obstacle. There's a difference." Victor glanced at his men, then back to me. "And now you're an obstacle. One I need to remove or repurpose. Your choice." I understood then. This wasn't about the USB. Not entirely. It was about control. Victor had built his coup on calculated moves and controlled narratives. A dead waitress would raise questions he couldn't afford. But a bought one? That was just good business. "What do you want?" I asked. "The drive. And your cooperation." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it to face me. A wider transfer confirmation. $400,000 pending my account information. Enough to save your grandmother's legacy and cover your silence. All you have to do is work for me. Small tasks, deliveries, observations. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. Just a pair of eyes in places I can't be. "You mean a spy?" "I mean an employee with excellent benefits." Victor's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something colder. "The alternative is I explain to the police how you broke into Ha-joon's residence, and stole from a comatose man. Your fingerprints are all over that penthouse. Your keycard logs prove you were there. And when they search you, they'll find stolen property. The trap closed with perfect precision. He'd let me take the USB, let me run, let me believe I'd won so he could use my desperation against me. How do I know you won't kill me once I give you the drive? Because I'm not Ha-joon. I don't waste resources. He held out his hand. You're more valuable alive and cooperative than dead and problematic. 300,000 to save your grandmother's center, 100,000 for your trouble, all of it yours right now in exchange for the drive and your discretion. I looked at his outstretched hand, at the phone showing more money than I'd ever imagined having, at the men blocking every exit. I thought about my grandmother's voice reading scripture, about mercy and justice, and the price of survival in a world that didn't offer second chances to people who looked like me. I reached into my bra and pulled out the USB drive. Victor's fingers closed around it with the satisfaction of a man who'd never doubted the outcome. Welcome to the organization, Miss Wright. You start tomorrow. The money hit my account 6 hours later. All 400,000, exactly as promised. I paid off the liens on my grandmother's center, cleared the predatory loans, and watched 40 years of her work get pulled back from the edge of erasure. Then I threw up in my apartment bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman who just sold her soul to save a building. But Victor didn't buy my soul. He bought my visibility. And visibility, I was learning, worked both ways. My new role was exactly as advertised. Small tasks. A courier, delivering sealed envelopes to addresses across the city. An assistant, sitting in on meetings, taking notes Victor never read. Proof of loyalty through mundane service. He tested me constantly, watching for hesitation, for moral collapse, for any sign I might become a liability. I gave him nothing. I was the perfect employee. Punctual, obedient, invisible in all the ways that mattered. And while I played my role, I listened. Victor ran the organization from the executive dining room, conducting business in a rotation of languages I couldn't fully understand, but could map by tone and repetition. Korean for internal affairs, Russian for external alliances, English for legal matters, Serbian for things he didn't want overheard. I learned his patterns. Conference calls at 9, private meetings at 2, a daily visit to Northwestern Memorial at 7, maintaining the fiction of the devoted consigliere, keeping vigil over his comatose boss. I learned his plan. There would be a formal succession vote in 2 weeks, pending Ha-joon's continued incapacitation. The board of directors, 12 men who controlled territories from Vancouver to Seoul, would convene in Chicago. Victor had 9 votes secured. He needed 10 for an uncontested transition. The holdouts were 2 men. One was already being persuaded through financial incentives I helped deliver. The other was Min So-joon, Ha-joon's oldest friend and the organization's chief of operations. So-joon had gone silent after the collapse, refusing Victor's calls, avoiding the office, a loyalist in exile, waiting for a king who might never wake. I found him by accident, or maybe by the universe's sense of irony, at my grandmother's center. He was there on a Saturday afternoon speaking to the director about a donation. Anonymous, substantial, enough to fund operations for a year. I recognized him from photographs in Ha-joon's penthouse, older now, gray at the temples, but carrying himself with the same quiet authority. I waited until he was leaving, then dropped my cleaning rag directly in his path. He stopped, bent to pick it up, and I was there, apologizing in the breathless way of service workers who'd made a mistake. "I'm so sorry, sir. Here, let me—" I took the rag back and pressed a napkin in his hand with it. On the napkin, written in pencil that could be wiped away, Table 7, Barolo, 2015. The wine cellar. The place I had overheard everything. The code was thin, barely a code at all, but it was enough. Sojun's eyes met mine for one perfect second, recognition flickering there, and he nodded once before walking away. 3 days later, I was restocking the wine cellar at Azure when he appeared in the doorway. No announcement, no security, just a man who knew how to move through buildings like smoke. You worked here the night Ha-joon collapsed. Not a question. Yes. Victor hired you 6 days later. I bought him, I corrected. There's a difference. Sejun studied me with the expression of a man who'd spent decades reading people for survival. What do you want? To stop him, the words came out steadier than I felt. Victor's planning the succession vote for 2 weeks from now. He has 9 votes. Yours is the last one standing between him and complete control. And what do you think I can do? Ha-joon is comatose. The doctors say he may never wake. The organization needs leadership. The organization needs its actual leader, not the man who put him in the hospital. I pulled out my phone, showed him the notes I had been taking. Dates, transfers, names, a pattern of embezzlement and consolidation that painted a picture of long-term planning. Sojun's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the evidence. You're risking your life showing me this. I'm risking it either way. At least this way it counts for something. Sojun pocketed my phone, then handed it back with a contact saved under a restaurant supply vendor. If you need me, order napkins. I'll find you within the hour. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Ha-joon chose his inner circle carefully. If you're doing this, it's because you see something worth saving. Don't let Victor make you doubt that. He disappeared into the restaurant, leaving me alone with wine bottles and the weight of a conspiracy I'd just made exponentially more dangerous. The call came 4 days later. Not from Seo-joon, but from Victor, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. Meet me at Northwestern. Now. I found him in the ICU waiting room, staring through the glass at Ha-joon's room. For the first time since I'd known him, Victor looked unsettled. Not panicked, never panicked, but the careful control had cracked just enough to show something raw beneath. He's awake, Victor said. Conscious. The doctors are calling it miraculous. The word came out like an accusation. My heart kicked against my ribs. That's good news. Is it? Victor turned to face me, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The board convenes in 6 days. Ha-joon is conscious but weak, confused. The doctors say it will be weeks, maybe months, before he's capable of resuming control, if ever. So you proceed as planned. I accelerate. Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at me. The vote happens in 3 days. I'm calling an emergency session. Ha-joon's incapacitation will be medically documented. The transition will be clean, legal, and irreversible. 3 days. Seo-joon had been working on securing Ha-joon's protection, moving him to a private facility where Victor's influence couldn't reach. But 3 days wasn't enough time to get him stable, much less capable of challenging Victor's claim. What do you need from me? I asked. Loyalty. Victor studied me with the focus of a man who'd built empires on reading weakness. There will be people who question the timing, who wonder if Ha-joon's recovery is convenient or suspicious. I need you visible, present, a witness who can testify that everything was handled properly. He paused. Unless you have doubts. No doubts. The lie came easily now. You saved the organization. I'm just here to help. Victor's expression softened into something almost resembling approval. Good, because after the vote, there will be restructuring, positions opening up, opportunities for people who've proven themselves valuable. He handed me a folder. Deliver this to each board member tonight.
Flight arrangements for the emergency session. I want confirmations by morning. I took the folder and left the hospital, my mind already racing through the math that didn't add up. 3 days, 12 board members, 9 votes secured. But Ha-joon was awake now, which changed everything. If Ha-joon could get even 2 board members to delay the vote, to demand Ha-joon be given time to recover and respond, the whole succession would collapse. I called the napkin vendor from a gas station payphone 2 miles from the hospital. Ha-joon answered on the first ring. I heard. 3 days. Victor's forcing the vote. Ha-joon's still too weak to fight back. The poison did permanent damage. He's conscious, but his speech is compromised, his memory fragmented. Even if we delay the vote, Victor will just argue medical incapacity. Then we don't delay it. The plan formed as I spoke, reckless and desperate and possibly suicidal. We attend it, and we make sure the board sees exactly what Victor is. You have evidence. I have better than evidence. I have access. I looked down at the folder in my hands, at the flight confirmations and hotel reservations, at Victor's careful orchestration of his coronation. I'm delivering his invitations tonight, which means I know exactly where every board member will be and exactly when Victor will make his play. Ha-joon was quiet for a long moment. If this fails, he'll kill you. If this fails, he's already won. At least this way, Ha-joon has a chance. Then we move the evidence now, tonight, before Victor realizes you're not just his courier anymore. The emergency session convened in the Azure's private conference room on the 43rd floor. 12 men who controlled territories worth billions, seating around a table of polished ebony that reflected their faces like a jury. Victor stood at the head, impeccable in a charcoal suit, the picture of composed leadership. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed Chicago's skyline, a kingdom waiting to be claimed. I entered, as I always did, invisible, the waitress bringing water service, adjusting glassware, setting down leather portfolios at each seat. No one looked at me. No one ever did. That invisibility, once a cage, had become my weapon. Victor began his address in English, his voice carrying the measured authority of inevitability. He spoke of Ha-joon's legacy, of the organization's need for stability, of his own reluctant duty to step forward in this time of crisis. The board members listened with faces carved from stone, revealing nothing. I moved around the table, pouring water with mechanical precision. At Victor's seat, I set down a crystal glass and adjusted the microphone on the table before him. My hand brushed the base for just a moment, fingers finding the small device Ha-joon had given me the night before, a secondary transmitter paired to the room's AV system. Victor didn't notice. He was too focused on his performance, too confident in his control. The doctors have confirmed Mr. Kang's condition remains critical, Victor continued, pulling out medical documentation. While we all pray for his recovery, the organization cannot remain in stasis indefinitely. I propose we proceed with the succession vote as outlined in our charter. I propose you proceed to hell. The voice came through every speaker in the room, weak but unmistakable. Ha-joon's voice. The screens mounted on the walls flickered to life, showing him propped up in a hospital bed, his face gaunt but his eyes burning with the focused intensity of a man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Victor's expression cracked for the first time. Just a flicker, a microsecond of pure shock before the mask reasserted itself. But the board had seen it. Everyone had seen it. Ha-joon. Victor's voice remained steady, but his hand clenched around the portfolio. You should be resting. The doctor said I was poisoned. Ha-joon's words came slowly, each one deliberate. Aconitin, traced back to a vial purchased through a Serbian contact 6 weeks ago, purchased by you, Victor. my most trusted advisor, my brother. The room went arctic. One of the board members reached for his phone. Another pushed back from the table. "This is absurd." Victor turned to face the screens, his composure reassembling into righteous indignation. Ha-joon is clearly confused. The trauma, the medications. The evidence is not confused. I spoke for the first time, my voice cutting through his denial. Every head in the room turned toward me, the invisible waitress suddenly visible. I pulled out my phone and cast it to the room's display. Financial records appeared on the screens beside Ha-joon's face, transaction histories, embezzlement trails, communications between Victor and offshore accounts, the USB drive's contents organized and annotated by Ha-joon over the past 72 hours. "Ms. Wright has been very helpful," Ha-joon said, something almost resembling amusement in his damaged voice. "Turns out the person no one sees is the person who sees everything." Victor's face went through a calculation I could read like text. Fight or flee? Deny or destroy? He chose destruction. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward whatever weapon he'd carried as insurance. He never reached it. Ha-joon entered through the service door, flanked by two of Ha-joon's personal security team, men who'd been loyal long before Victor had learned to spell ambition. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, disarming Victor and securing him before he could complete the reach. "The vote is postponed indefinitely," Ha-joon said from the screen, "pending my full recovery and a complete audit of organizational finances. Victor Kovac is hereby removed from all positions and remanded to our internal justice system." He paused, his eyes finding mine through the camera. "Ms. Wright, please stay. We have much to discuss." The board filed out in silence, shock and calculation warring on their faces. Victor was escorted past me, his expression, finally, perfectly empty. The mask discarded, the performance over. As the door closed behind him, Ha-joon's image remained on the screen, studying me with an intensity that felt like being X-rayed. "You saved my life and my empire. That's not a debt easily repaid." Ha-joon returned to the Azuri 3 weeks later, moving with the careful precision of a man rebuilding himself from the inside out. The poison had taken something permanent, left him thinner, sharper, like a blade that had been reforged in a hotter fire. But his eyes held the same cold calculation they always had, and when he walked into a room, men still straightened their spines and measured their words. He summoned me to his penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon. Not the executive dining room where he conducted business, not the conference room where he held court, his private residence, the place I'd broken into and stolen from, now offered as neutral ground. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Not a request. Never a request. But there was something in his tone that wasn't quite commanding either, something closer to respect. I sat. He poured tea with hands that still trembled slightly, a reminder of how close he'd come to the edge. "The victor is dead," he said, matter-of-factly. "Our internal justice system is efficient, if nothing else. The board has been reminded of the cost of disloyalty. The organization is stable. Good. Your grandmother's community center received an additional donation. Anonymous. Enough to fund operations for 5 years and establish an endowment for perpetual sustainability." He set down his cup. "Consider it interest on the debt I owe you." I'd learned the money arrived the week before. 7 figures, structured through enough legal layers that no one could trace it back to the Kong organization. My grandmother had cried when the lawyers called. She'd asked me if I'd prayed for a miracle. I'd told her something like that. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "I did what was necessary to survive." "No, you did what was necessary to win." Ha-joon leaned forward, his gaze holding mine with the intensity of a man who'd spent his life reading people for profit. "Victor bought your compliance. I watched you pretend loyalty while building his execution. That requires a particular kind of intelligence, the kind I need more than I need another soldier or accountant." What are you offering? A position. Chief Strategic Advisor. You'll have access to everything: meetings, finances, personnel, operations. Your job will be to see what I can't see, to be invisible when necessary and visible when it matters, to tell me the truth even when the truth is dangerous. He paused. Especially when it's dangerous. I thought about my grandmother reading scripture in that South Side apartment, about mercy unearned and freely given, about how I'd crossed a line the moment I took Victor's money and couldn't uncross it by exposing him. The stain was permanent. The only question was what I built on top of it. I'm not like Victor. I won't betray you for power. He knows. That's why I'm asking. Ha-joon's expression softened into something that might have been a smile if he'd allowed it to fully form. Victor thought loyalty meant obedience, but loyalty means telling me when I'm wrong, stopping me before I become the monster who needs to be poisoned. And if you become that monster anyway, then you'll do what's necessary, just like you did with him. He extended his hand. Do we have an understanding? I looked at his hand, at the offer that would transform me from invisible service worker to visible power broker, from witness to architect, from the girl who brings the water to the woman who decides who drinks and who drowns. I took his hand. We have an understanding. 6 months later, I sat beside Ha-joon at the head of the conference table in the Azure's executive dining room. The 12 board members watched me with the careful attention reserved for people who held their fortunes in their hands. I wore a tailored suit that cost more than my old annual salary. My voice carried weight that didn't require volume. And when I spoke, men who controlled empires listened. Ha-joon introduced a new policy initiative. I noted the 3 board members whose body language suggested resistance. I passed Ha-joon a note identifying leverage points we'd prepared in advance. He adjusted his proposal accordingly. The vote passed unanimously. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Ha-joon looked at me with that same calculating intensity. You see the game before it's played. I learned from the best, both the teacher and the cautionary tale. He laughed like a sound of breaking glass. Victor taught you what not to become. I'll teach you what you can be. And what's that? Necessary. Ha-joon stood, straightening his cuffs. The most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. You've mastered invisibility. Now we teach you visibility. And together, we'll make sure no one ever poisons either of us again. I followed him from the conference room, no longer the waitress serving water, but the strategist serving truth. Monster and witness. Boss and advisor. King and queen of an empire built on seeing what others missed. My grandmother had prayed for a miracle. She got something better. She got me, transformed and dangerous, and finally, terrifyingly visible.
If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe so you'll never miss a great story. Don't forget to comment if you want to know what happens next.